Everyone, welcome to the TWE committee meeting. I'd like to invite Makairi to open it, please.
Kia ora. Whakatakateho ki te uru, whakatakateho ki te tonga, ki mā kina, ki uta, ki mā tara ki tai. Ehi akatana te kura, hei tio, hei huka, hei hohu, tie muriora.
Kia ora. And so we have apology from Councillor Goff today, and we have Catherine's here on Zoom. Welcome, Catherine. So is there any other apologies? No early departures? Possible one from Andrew if we don't get finished in time, but I think we will. So do I have a mover for those apologies, please? Sam, and seconded Mel. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. Just be mindful of declarations of interest. Is there anything anyone would like to declare at this point? No? And move on to item 3, confirmation of previous minutes. Do I have a mover for those? Tim, thank you. Seconded by Phil. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. And we're up to item 4. And I'd like to invite John Christie, who has a public forum for us today, presenting on the health impacts of fluoridisation. And I just draw your attention to the 2 supporting documents that we have on our hub that we can refer to as you go through your 5 minutes. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You will be getting a copy of the prepared presentation after the meeting, but I'm aware that the general understanding among the council is that fluoridation is out of the hands of the council, which formally speaking and legally speaking it is, but in reality I think Christchurch in particular has considerable power to influence what happens here and probably in the rest of the country, but really the concentration should be here. So I'll just briefly mention some of the things that you'll see in the written presentation. And just myself, I've lived in Christchurch for a long time. I'm a retired scientist with a background in general science and engineering. And I want to make 2 key points. One is that the science of safety is not settled. The assertions to the contrary are wrong, straight out wrong. And the numbers of people that will be affected and their children is large. There would be about 20,000 children immediately that fluoride goes into the water. Well, I say affected because potentially the evidence says they will be affected. But in this sort of thing, epidemiology, certainty is very difficult. Like tobacco, for example, you see it took decades before people accepted that it really was dangerous. I think the evidence in the case of fluoride is simpler. And what triggered this presentation was an article in Nature, which most of you will have heard of. It's the world's #1 science journal, so if you can trust anything in science, it's not a guarantee, nothing is, but that is a pretty good authoritative statement. And they say, and I'll quote it, an increasing number of studies are indicating that fluoride might be a developmental neurotoxin, even at the level that the US Public Health Service has declared optimal for fluoridation. And that level is the same as in New Zealand, are very similar. And what they mean by developmental neurotoxin is it interferes not with the brain normal functioning, but with the brain development. So the development starts in the 3rd week of pregnancy and it lasts till at least age 5, most of it finished by then. So that whole period, if something interferes in that period, that whatever damage incurs is likely to be permanent. So it's a really big issue, and nobody should be taking any risks with it. But I believe at the moment the Ministry of Health intends to take those risks. So my request is that the Council write to the Director General of Health. There's a list of scientific studies that support what I've just said. I would invite you to send that to him to ask why the Ministry's stance on fluoridation is inconsistent with the current science. The current science is pretty clear. It's pointing in one direction. And I think as well to indicate to the Director General that Christchurch Council would not expect a directive to fluoridate to be received until this question of neurotoxicity is settled. So I open, please give me your questions.
Right, thank you very much.
Sorry, can I just make one more point?
Yes, you can.
The power I think the council has is that it's pretty clear the ministry does not want this subject to be talked about. So just the hint that this might get widely into the public domain is a power that this council has. So writing to the Director General will raise some red flags in the ministry, in my opinion. I finished.
Oh, thank you for coming in. That's very helpful. Fluoride is a natural occurring substance as well, isn't it? So are you talking
Yep.
Degree of consumption equals?
Yeah. If you look at the very last page of the list of references I have, there's a graph there showing IQ versus fluoride concentration. And it goes right down to the levels in Christchurch now, the natural level. I mean, it doesn't matter where fluoride comes from, whether it comes naturally, is put in there, it can come from coal burning, it comes from tea. Tea has got a lot of fluoride in it. It doesn't matter where it comes from. If a pregnant woman is exposed or young children are exposed, there is a risk. And there's many studies that are showing what that is now.
Oh, that's really helpful to us. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming in. It's always good to hear these views when we're making decisions. So we'll take this offline and perhaps request some more information from our staff before we perhaps take any action on it. But I really appreciate you coming in and speaking to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, so that takes us now to, there's no deputations by appointment and there's no petitions today. So that takes us to the minutes of the Zone Committee. So I'd like to move 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11 all together. And if there's any matters arising from those, we can bring them into the triennial reports, which will be up next. So I'll move those minutes. Do I have a seconder? Aaron, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed, that's carried. So item 12, the triennial Zone Committee update. And we've got Gina and Kevin today. And an apology from Les from the Selwyn Waihora Zone Committee. And I just thought if there's any burning questions from that report, which you've got in your hub, we can take a note of them and forward them through and get a response that way. So welcome. So who have we got first? Who'd like to kick away? And I'll just pull it up. 12. So Kevin, would you like to go first? Or?
Okay.
It's up to you guys. You sort it out.
Yep, no, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Welcome.
Good.
Nice to
Thanks.
see you.
Thanks very much. Tēnā koutou, everybody. You've all got copies of the report, so I'd just like to add and highlight a few things. Committee's been fairly busy during the previous 4 months at a couple of workshops putting together and fleshing out the prioritised action plan that we've got for the next 3 years. This is seen as a working document for the Zone Committee. Not all actions are planned for the first year, and it is seen as a living document that can be altered as circumstances change. But in general, the top priority action is community engagement, and that's what we're putting an emphasis on. This year, the committee didn't have a budget for biodiversity projects as we've had previously, but instead we had a 50k budget to help to implement the action plan, and this has to be tied to the various actions that we have published. The budget is therefore being prepared, and that is tied to the actions that are proposed for the next year, which is ending in June, so we have to spend that money before June, which actually might be more difficult than we think. On to what we've been doing. In community engagement, we recently held a hui with representatives of the main community groups in Christchurch connected with the Christchurch catchments. and the two councils as well to try and firm up how the Zone Committee could best help these community groups achieve their aims. This was a very worthwhile meeting. A number of helpful roles were seen for the Zone Committee, and a key role was seen to collaborate with the Community Waterways Partnership to implement its charter and the Zone Committee's action plan together. So that was a key thing. There was a number of, we did a complete SWOT analysis, and there was a whole pile of actions came out of that. I'd just like to highlight, at our August meeting, we had a deputation from the Avon Heathcote Estuary Trust. They were very worried about the proposed 360 trail that was being proposed to go through the middle of the bird sanctuary in the estuary. A representative from the 360 trail, also present as the opposition, if you like, presented to the committee, who maintained that the trail wouldn't disturb the birds in the sanctuary. It was found out that the trail is supposed to be dog friendly, and there was a lot of discussion about whether a trail complete with possible dogs could be compatible with the bird sanctuary, given how important the bird sanctuary is. There's nobody on the Zone Committee that has expertise in this area, and I realise this has been on the Council's radar for quite a while, but the Zone Committee really urges the Council to carefully consider the ramifications of this decision. One of the actions that we've got in our action plan for the Zone Committee is to advocate for continuing updates to the mathematical model for the groundwater system in Christchurch City. The modelling done by ECAN was 3 to 4 years ago, suggested that there was a flow of groundwater from Waimakariri district under the Waimakariri River and into the Christchurch aquifers. This ultimately led, as you all realise, to Plan Change 7, which has just been notified by ECAN and places restrictions on nitrate levels in the Waimakariri district. The mathematical model is the only tool that you have for predicting the long-term future of Christchurch's drinking water supply. The model relies on a set of data for things like average stream flows, water levels in wells, rainfall, amount of irrigation, and things like that. As I understand it, the current model uses all of the available data, but could always be improved as more data becomes available. This model, mathematical, currently resides in ECAN, and I would urge the Council to keep a watching brief and to encourage ECAN to collect and invest in more data collection to improve and update the model. This is the only way that you can predict what's going to happen with your groundwater aquifers as you withdraw from deeper and deeper aquifers, possibly, or whatever you do. It's a very important tool for you. Finally, this will be my last report to the Council. My 6-year period on the Zone Committee finishes at Christmas. I'd like to thank the Council for supporting the Zone Committee, both financially and in every other way, and always giving us a sympathetic hearing here. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Kevin, and that's sad news. You've been a fabulous chair there, so you'll be missed. Thank you for all your work. Can I just ask you a question about the groundwater modelling? So how often at the moment is it being updated, do you know?
It's not.
Aha.
They did the model and called it quits at that stage. I've actually spoken to the modellers at ECAN. I also went and spoke with Becca, who do modelling for you as well, and spoken with Aqualink. And the non-ECAN people said that more data would certainly be helpful. So it's a particular kind of model. It's called a stochastic model, which means that you put in values and then you run it varying everything. And they did maybe 2,500, 3,000 runs, and then they figured out the probability of various things happening, like water coming under the Waimakariri. So it's it definitely, the more data you put in, the better the model gets. So
is the data being collected?
No, there's no further data being collected, but it is not necessarily an easy thing, because you might need like deeper wells in some of the Waimakariri district, things like that.
So when was the modelling done?
I think it was about 3 years ago.
So we could put a note at the end of this to write to ECAN and suggest that on the back of the report.
I'll also be presenting to the ECAN Council, and I'll also be mentioning it to them.
Yes,
Yep.
that's a good idea.
Yep.
I know it's a complicated piece of work, but it's really, really important that
It's
we do
extremely complex, yeah.
it. Yeah. Are there any other questions for Kevin? Aaron?
Yeah, just around that modelling, because I thought that when we got an update on it last time, so a few years ago, they used the term could, not is, when with water coming under the WIMAC. So, because the public, now there's members of the public that say that it is, and that it does have nitrates, and there's nitrates. So it goes from one step to the other, whereas it might have been modelling that said that it could happen or would possibly happen or probably. So can you clarify that?
Well, the thing is that stochastic modelling, it's a probability. So there is a probability. So it can happen. It's not 100% probability.
So at this point, water isn't coming under the WIMAC into our aquifers? Or it could be.
I'm not the right person to talk to. You need to talk to the modelers, but they are fairly certain that there is. And in order to prove that, they actually went ahead, spent $3 million drilling 3 sets of 3 wells. And they pretty much confirmed that there was a vertical flow downwards. They drilled wells at 50, 100 and 150 metres deep and cased them.
Yep.
And the water height in each was, as they got deeper, the water level got less, which means that the water is actually flowing down. So,
So it's not modelling, it's factual then?
well, that was after they'd done the modelling. They drilled these wells to try and prove it, basically, and the wells confirmed their suspicions, if you like. But it's never 100% with the stochastic modelling.
Right. Well, that's really helpful to us. We're just putting another addition to the resolution there. You might be able to help us with the wording, Kevin.
With the what, sorry?
The wording here, encouraging them to continually update data for the groundwater modelling.
Yep.
Actually, it's actually updating the groundwater modelling itself, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
to
not actually. The data that they have, I don't know. I don't know how good it is, but
So just take
as well as the data they can use with more, they can use more data, like deep well data and some.
so continually update the data and the groundwater modelling.
Yes, that'd be correct. Yeah,
And yeah.
it's probably every 5 years, something like that. It needs to be updated.
That's arguable because if it's 3 years old already, there'll be another 2 before we get another model, and
Yep.
Time's marching on, isn't it? We'll see what they come up with anyway.
Right.
Are there any more questions for Kevin? Yanni?
Thank you for the work that you've done. I really appreciate it. I was just interested if the zone committees had provided feedback or seen the recommendations around the stormwater management plans that are going to council tomorrow.
Yes, we
there were
have. We've
any-
provided some.
Any views on them?
Yes, we put in a submission
Right.
originally. Yeah, I don't have it with me, but
Right.
yeah, but there has been some submission going.
Was it? Do
There,
you know what-
there was two stormwater plans, weren't there?
yeah, Apawaho
Are
Heathcote.
you talking about the second one?
Both of them, but I guess I was just interested in any high-level concerns that you had.
We're very concerned about the stormwater. Part of the action plan is to figure out how we can get kind of a change in people's attitudes towards stormwater, and that we figured that has to come from a higher level, that has to come from government.
Right.
So things like zinc and copper and all of those things. And we spend a lot of time also with sediment on the Port Hills. So it needs a culture change, and it has to come. I mean, for instance, zinc. You just have to make zinc roofs, ordinary galvanised roofs, not allowable, and have colour steel instead. Things like that. So it has to come from building consents which I guess you have some control over, but it's probably more coming from central government.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So, Gina, would you like to present your report?
Thank you. The Banks Peninsula Zone Committee's focus in recent months has been our action plan budget, and settling in our new committee members. As mentioned in our last report in July, we've finalised our action plan, and our focus has moved on how we can achieve those actions. Zone committee members have each volunteered to take a lead or supporting roles for our key actions, and our meeting topics have focused on things that can directly contribute to achieving those. The action plan budget, which replaces the Immediate Steps Fund, has also been a focus as we work through how best to allocate the $50,000 available this year. The budget provides a lot more flexibility with few constraints when compared to the IMS fund, and we have utilised that by recommending that a small amount of money go towards some time for a wastewater expert in the Wainui community, just for a day to give community members a chance to ask questions and get information, which will hopefully result in residents deciding to get their systems inspected or upgraded. We've also put a small amount towards climate change communication, and we'll also be looking at how we can work with Christchurch, West Melton and Selwyn zone committees to potentially pool some funds when we're working on engagement and communication projects that align with those zones. The remainder of the budget will largely go towards the more typical on-the-ground projects. We do have some concerns regarding that budget and have been discussing how we can ensure that it's fairly allocated, given that it's no longer a contestable fund. So on Banks Peninsula, most of our funding typically goes to small fencing and covenanting projects on private land, and we as a committee need to make sure that those landowners still have an opportunity to make us aware of projects that they want to do. We don't want to end up in a situation where funding goes to projects and community groups that zone committee members happen to know without there being a transparent, objective or fair process behind it. In addition to the action plan budget, work is also being done through the CCC and ECAN work programs, and the Zone Committee are pleased that these programs continue to focus staff time on resources in the Wairewa catchment, as well as the 3 priority catchments that the committee identified in Wainui, Goffs and Paraki. We're hopeful that this will continue and will result in more work being done in those catchments that leads to ki uta ki tai solutions from the mountains to the sea. In Wairewa, the Zone Committee has written a letter of support to encourage the River Rating District and flood management work to continue, and also that recommended that bank stabilisation work and biodiversity objectives be incorporated so that the health of the rivers, streams and Te Roto or Wairewa can improve. The committee sees this work in Wairewa as very important. And I think at the moment it's a little bit uncertain as to the commitment of ECAN's resources continuing to go towards that, but yeah, time will tell. At our November meeting, the committee had the opportunity to provide feedback to CCC on the proposed community engagement for the stormwater management plan. This did spark a discussion afterwards on how councils might engage in these types of consultations, as the stormwater management plan has quite a tight scope, and it's, given that it only covers developed areas and focuses on the piped network, committee members felt that this type of narrowed down discussion is not that helpful to the general members of the public, and that if effort is going into engaging with the community, that it should ideally be done in a more integrated way, so that feedback can be sought on a broader topic. For example, consultation for related plans such as the Strategic Surface Water Implementation Plan and ECAN's Integrated Planning Framework could be aligned, so that it could be done through one round of consultation. We acknowledge that that would be probably quite difficult to do, but in general feel that it would be better if consultation was at least planned from the public's point of view. With regards to water quantity, the committee would like to get the word out that there won't be enough water for all the uses that people want, particularly on Banks Peninsula where waterways are small and there often aren't alternative sources available. Initial investigations suggest that current rules are not fit for purpose on the peninsula for permitted takes, and changes that are likely through Te Mana or Te Wai will see less water available for people and stock as the environment is prioritised. So the committee strongly encourages council to prepare for future water issues given the impact of climate change and the changing freshwater regulations, particularly ensuring that new developments don't create long-term legacy issues. I'd also just quickly like to cover the native afforestation through the emissions trading scheme. The Zone Committee developed a case study in Little River, which was recently presented to ECAN councillors. That case study showed how difficult it is to make native afforestation financially viable under the ETS, especially when compared to planting exotic trees or continuing to farm marginal farmland. So if we want to see more natives on the peninsula, it would help to lobby central government for changes to the ETS so that that's more easily possible. And lastly, I'd just like to mention our new committee members, Trudy Bishop, George Howden and Eliza Knight, and I was also reappointed for a second 3-year term. And I'd also like to mention the input that we've received from Tori Peden, the chair of the Banks Peninsula Community Board, who is now an alternate for Deputy Mayor Andrew Turner. And we're very pleased that alternates have been allowed and have benefited from Tori's input, particularly as working more closely with the community board has been a goal of ours as well. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any questions, Regina? No. So a good report, and I think having this, we can refer to your suggestions in your report here, particularly in your advocating to local, regional, central government for statutory, non-statutory improvements. There's got some really good ideas in there that we can refer to as we go on. Sarah.
Thank you both so much. Quick question, you both mentioned the $50,000 that you've got for the implementation funding, where the immediate steps was, I think, twice that. And I'm just wondering if you were able to do more with more funding. I think you mentioned that you would struggle maybe to do it this time. But that seemed, halving the funding when there's so much work to do, was it because the work's quite different, or just because there's funding constraints at the moment? Do you know?
No,
So the 50,000 is just for the first year, and next year that'll be 75, and then I think the following year it goes back up to 100.
Okay, so you can plan ahead for future greater spending. Oh, that's great.
So I think the change was just because with the disbanding of the old fund, there's just a period of adjustment. Basically.
And different types of things that you're doing. That's great, thanks.
That's great. Oh, well, thank you. So we won't see you again, Kevin. Is this your last one?
no, afraid not.
Right.
I now live in Selwyn, so it doesn't seem fair to be representing the Christchurch West Melton Zone Committee.
But we do have to recognise the incredible work that the zone committees are doing. There's quite a large time commitment, and I think it's really heartening that there's always so many people put their name forward to go on these committees. It's challenging, but it's really enjoyable work, and particularly now that it's about collaborating and reaching out to the community and bringing everyone together. It's quite rewarding, isn't it? But thank you again very much.
It's been a good time.
Yeah, good. So I'd like to move that we receive the report and we have that additional recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Sarah? Any discussion? Oh, that'd be lovely, yes.
Ah, thank you.
A note of thanks. Recognising Kevin Brown's excellent service to the city by the Zone Committee. That's great.
Very good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
That's minuted for time immemorial. All right, well, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So, item 13, the draft submission on the Ministry for Environment's draft waste strategy. And welcome, Ruth. Thank you. I'll just pull it up.
Thank you very much. You'll notice that unfortunately Ross Trotter and Rowan Latham from the Resource Recovery Team aren't here to answer your questions on technical matters. So, but I hope that I can provide some policy input anyway.
Yeah, are you going to run through a presentation or introduce it, or do you just want us to go
I'll just speak to it if I may.
Yeah, it's a very good submission, I think, but yeah, you speak to it.
No, thank you. And councillors will be aware that you also had a workshop earlier in the piece, a briefing in which we invited, the staff invited input, and together put together this draft submission. I guess the main points that I wish to make is that there's strong support for the underlying principles and overall direction of this strategy and issues and options for new legislation. In particular, we consider that we can and must do better in moving towards a low waste circular economy, and that we consider the enactment of comprehensive waste legislation and development of a new strategy are critical first steps. So I think one of the key themes of the submission is that we are looking to get it to having a much stronger basis for moving forward. If the council has produced its own, as you know, waste management and minimisation plan, but clearly we need the leadership in the form of legislation and a comprehensive strategy and action plan from central government if we're going to achieve our goals in terms of waste minimisation. And the submission, as you'll see, goes through the questions asked one by one pretty well. Most of them we give a response to, not all of them. I'd also like to point out that the submission is very much aligned with the mayoral forum submission, which I'm sure you will have seen. And while it emphasises certain aspects perhaps and takes certain views, it is very much aligned with the mayoral forum submission and with our partners, territorial authorities and the regional council generally. Really, it's I think Canterbury is fortunate in having such good alignment within the region.
Yes,
for
because
waste
great minds
management.
think alike.
Indeed. Yes, yes.
Because I like the title of this, that MV's titled it, Taking Responsibility for Our Waste. And it is about that, and a lot of it is around education as well. And when you talk about the roles, the different roles, I think number 19 there on page 80 describes it quite nicely. Central government would have the role of preparing the waste strategy. Regional councils undertake regulatory activities. Territorial authorities will include waste minimisation and management planning, service delivery and education. Although I note in there that we're asking central government to take an education role as well.
Yes.
So I think that's quite clearly outlines the different roles that the different levels have quite nicely. So I'll open it up for questions. Are there any? Yanni?
Thanks. I guess I'm just interested that it seems like there needs to be much more of a national-led approach given the scale and the size of New Zealand.
Well, we've requested that in here.
Where's that?
Oh, God, no, it's in here somewhere, I read it. But yes, it's definitely asking the government to take a lead on it. But,
There is a very, very much we're seeking, for example, a legislative basis and a strategy so that we can align, so that we can get alignment and comprehensive waste minimisation.
Right, because I think, like, I guess the concern is in the introduction, the 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth paragraph. It kind of talks about the need for local authorities having flexibility and varied circumstances, and I kind of understand that. But it seems to me, if you looked at what's happened in New Zealand, the fact that every council is doing something slightly different is very confusing for the public. It doesn't generate sufficient capacity for resource recovery.
I think we're asking for standardisation led from the national legislation, aren't we?
We're asking for standardisation, and I wish it would be helpful here to have the resource recovery Ross here to answer. But basically what we're asking for, as I understand it, is that we want standardisation in the materials collected,
Right.
but not in the way
Okay.
it's done. Because, you've got to remember that local authorities have different geography, different distributions of population.
Yeah.
So certainly if we're just talking about residential waste, which is one of the key aspects of waste management that councils deal with, we're saying, yes, we want the same types of waste and recycling recovery, but we want to be able to have flexibility in the way that we do it.
Right. Okay. And then I guess the other concern, I couldn't see the container deposit stuff. Is it in here or?
It's probably not. No, I don't know.
No, I guess that is maybe one that will, if there is container deposit, that will be led from, of course, central government very much.
Right.
So.
I just guess it was really interesting listening to the glass recycling debate and like the impact that the container deposit scheme has on resource recovery could be quite dramatic because it would alter the feasibility of larger scale interventions locally. So I wonder if we need to mention it. But I think it's a really good submission. It obviously goes through a lot of detail. The other thing I think we should be really, and I know you've kind of touched on it in the comments, but I think it would be good to have it in the introduction, would be we should actually be really strong in saying to government that the Resource Management Act and national policy statements and national environmental standards really do need to be put in place around these types of activities to ensure that the harm to the community is regulated. Because clearly what we've seen is that often these private companies don't have any responsibility, and it's very hard to get any action, and we've seen that classic case with Living Earth over a very long time, but there's also other examples where companies have, stockpiled waste, not disposed of it adequately.
No, that's all mentioned in here. Yeah.
It is.
I was just saying in the introduction, so
you want it moved into the.
Well, I just think it should be a really significant, it should be something we just draw out in the commentary at the start to say, we think there is there does need to be more caution around what's permitted and how it's permitted, and especially the impact on communities around enforcement and monitoring, so that communities aren't left to
Okay, so
deal
you
with the harm.
just want it highlighted in the introduction. It is in the report.
I mean, it is
But
mentioned in the thing. But.
Certainly we, for example, one of the strong themes of the submission is that that we want to see clear systems change.
Yes. Yeah.
And that we seek licensing for all waste services. So, so that would include collection and storage as well as the more, landfills and recovery services. So
So
I think
what
that's
Yanni's
quite
asking
clear.
for is that can it be highlighted in the
Yes,
introduction?
we can bring it forward from the specific into the general.
Well, but just leave it in both.
Like, yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
But what I meant is
Yeah.
because what's in the introduction is actually in the
That's
detail
right,
as
that's
well.
right. So
But
bring-
we can bring the
Yeah.
ones certainly into the front as well. There's no difficulty.
Okay,
that.
so, and I've just got a quick question on, I don't know if you can answer it, Ruth, just for clarity, it's on page 82 and it's number 33. And the question is there a need to strengthen and make better use of import and export controls to support waste minimisation and circular economy goals? For example, should we look at ways to prohibit exports of materials like low-value plastics? And is that talking about our export recyclable stuff, or do you know what that's talking about? Do you?
No, I really don't. I think.
Well, it's not a biggie. That's fine. If we could just get a memo and reply. 'Cause I was
Yes,
just curious
yes,
what
I
that
will
means.
get that. That's something I can't help with.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. This is excellent. Everyone else happy with it? Do you have a question, or do you want to move it?
Oh, just a question around a lot of the language. And whilst I agree that we need to reduce waste, there's often unintended consequences, of course. And when you look through this, it appears that a lot of what we'll be doing is more legislation and enforcement of that. So not necessarily creating less waste, but creating a money go round of a whole lot of people that will direct what happens with waste and so on and so forth. A bit like the container return scheme, which until we see how well it stacks up, we don't know if it stacks up. This looks like it's encouraging more of that rather than looking at just actually dealing with waste and having a lot less of it.
No, I don't.
I would have to say
Well, I can
that
find about 8 times it being said if you want me to read them all out. But
Just read one out anyway. The circular economy doesn't necessarily mean more money, costing more money. It means actually the contrary.
well, okay. Right. Hang on.
So is it a wording change that you're wanting, Aaron?
Well, no, it's not. It's not a wording change. It's just the actual direction of what we're doing. So under where you start with 5.4. However, we consider the current investment approach even a much more substantial fund will not achieve the significant transformation needed to move this. We advocate that both new agency and new, more effective regulatory tools are required to achieve the desired transformation in a way our society manages waste. That there is saying more tools and more regulation to get to, which means spending a lot of money to still achieve the same thing. Or does it not?
But that's just one part of it.
Oh, so we don't support those. Okay, if that's
Just read out a bit that said we think that tools will be
No.
more effective than money.
Okay, so
but tools aren't free, Sarah, in the real
but
world.
it is just one part of it, and the legislation is one tool.
Yeah.
You know, and the increased levy will be another one, and it's all sorts
Sorry, I
of tools.
can't hear you over Huffy next to me.
It wasn't me.
Okay, so I think we've overruled that comment to adjust the report. I'm happy to move this.
Come on, that's
Sarah,
inappropriate.
seconded.
Sexist.
Is there any further discussion,
What
any
is?
debate on this?
Those kind of comments aren't very helpful.
All right, I'll put the motion. Jimmy,
Which moving?
yes.
I think that's very, very important. I remember back to the August last year, the Jack, Melody, and me, we particularly in the hearing panel, we developed and established this 2020 waste management and minimization plan. Actually, that kind of is a strategic direction, particular vision. Vision actually is leading this direction. That we are all aware this the waste management minimization plan. We focus on this city, is a sustainable city, and we focus on moving forward the zero the waste and the circular economy. But if we review all the submission, we particularly emphasize we need to take this is a collaborative approach. It's rather than council can do it and make it happen. unless central government and also the community, individual, business, all working together. In this approach, we can make that happen. But regarding central government, most important is to establish, to develop those the sufficient legislation. Otherwise, it's very difficult. So the other one is we need to to particular focus on the continually improvement, particularly this kind of 30 years we mentioned, this linear one, possibly very difficult. This kind of the curve, rather than to the linear this one. So we focus on those support those 6 principles. I think prioritize we can make that happen. So that's very important. So that's why I fully support this one.
Thanks, Jimmy. Look, well said, and I think it's important to point out the urgency of this, which we have done, and the fact that we need the legislative changes so that they can replace the Litter Act of 1979 and the Waste Minimisation Act of 2008, and we need to step up our game. I mean, they're talking 2050, but that's a long time. I don't know if anyone saw the news last night in the state of Wellington streets with their rubbish not being removed at the moment, but it shows you the level of waste that we're still producing. It's just way too high. So we need, and in our submission we've requested that, and I think the Mayoral Forum has too, that they create a new government agency to address these issues and to develop the waste strategy and to review it. And I think we need that. That's where government sits. So I think this is an excellent submission. So if there's no other debate, I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Thanks for stepping in, Ruth. Good job. So item 14. So item 14, we just want to, a few volunteers to, and then we have delegation, I think, to work on the draft submission on the economic regulation and consumer protection for the 3 waters. So thanks, Sam, you've volunteered, and Leanne. Is there anyone else who'd like to be on this? There is a meeting scheduled for next Monday at 1:30. Okay, so have we got a resolution up there?
Yeah, 2, Pauline.
Yes, and I'll do it, but I will be late to that meeting, probably about 2:10, so I don't know how long it's going to be. Okay.
We should be able to accommodate you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm happy to move there. Oh well, someone else want to move it? Sarah move it and seconded. All those in favour say aye. 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 Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So number 15 is our wastewater minimisation implementation plan. Sorry, I'd like it to be minimisation as well. So we have got Michelle McDonald. That's all right, don't rush. Welcome, Michelle, thank you for stepping in.
Thank you. Right, good afternoon. Yep. All right. I probably won't take too much time on this, but we've just prepared a brief presentation really to talk about how the implementation plan has been structured. Rather than going through the individual actions, because that may take a bit longer. Just to recap, the implementation plan is an output of the integrated water strategy, and it has been delivered post the completion of the LTP and the asset management plans. So in fact, it tries to demonstrate how the LTP is serving back, is delivering the goals and the objectives of the integrated water strategy. In terms of timelines, from now on, we would be monitoring progress against the implementation plan, and obviously after the next LTP review, we will be able to review again the implementation plan. Integrated water strategy has got four key goals and 11 objectives. Not all of those objectives are applicable to wastewater treatment, but where they are, we have addressed them in terms of what the strategy is calling for, but also other actions that are contributing to achieving those objectives. In terms of structuring of the plan that we've put forward, really the essence of the plan is the Excel-based spreadsheet, which is, I realize at the back end, we did include some wording just to explain some of the projects and programs. But the spreadsheet is linking goals, objectives, and approaches to our actual programs, projects, and activities. That's been an output of the LTP. So it's a bit of a complex hierarchy, and there's, I suppose, many ways that you could hash it, but we've linked it at this stage through the spreadsheet. Then each of those program activities and projects has got a bit of a metadata to identify what the priority is, what the status is, how much is funded, how much is not funded in our current programs, etc., who the delivery team is, etc. The priority identification we've quantified against the funding level, whether it's funded or not. So if something is fully funded or it's part of our business as usual activities, it would get a 1. A 5 means that we do not believe that we have either enough resources or there's not capital funding. So it's aligned with the LTP. I've included in the presentation just going, all the objectives to give you an idea of the list of all of it, and or just referencing if there's any questions later on those, but I'm not going to work through each one of them right now. In terms of what's next, we would like to also work on the template so that it becomes better for monitoring progress. There's obviously, we probably need to consider how to number the actions so that it can be easier followed. And then it's about reporting progress on how frequent we need to indicate what the progress is against that plan. And that's probably open for discussion. My question mark, should it be annually? I've just put some slides in to give you an indication of some of the work that has happened in the meantime as well.
Great, thank you.
We're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the 1 to 5 chart you've got there, for reducing inflow and infiltration, identifying fixed pipes to reduce inflow and infiltration. We've got a 4 there, so that means that it's so that's an ongoing piece of work. It's funded but not complete.
Yes.
So there's enough funding to complete it, but it's
no, partly funded. So sorry, which one specific? The page number, the I&I.
The graph thing, the implementation plan structure with all the priority legend on it. If you go backwards a bit, and the orange.
Oh, on the first
objective
one. And the big spreadsheet.
5.
I don't have my big spreadsheet open. Reducing I&I, yes, part of the renewals that we're working in, which is funded, but there's another part of reducing I&I, specifically also the private part.
Yeah.
More resources needed, and I mean it's an ongoing process. We certainly don't have enough in our programs and budgets or resources to address I&I to the level that we want it to be addressed.
So is the private and public in that one box there, identifying fixed pipes?
Yeah, it's collective.
Okay.
Absolutely, yes. We see it as across the city collectively, and we estimate public side could be 50%, private side 50%, but there's such a lot of work involved in reducing that. Parallel, though, is our renewal program, which is also supporting that. So, but it is only targeted as a 4, because we believe there is still a lot that could be done.
So if you add that funding up, it's 11 million or something. Is that right? In those boxes, it's big money. These things, isn't it?
Yes, so Akarua only and Devotional is that those were targeted. So we did the monitoring, and we could target exactly which pipes should be repaired, and it includes also identification of private leaks. So I mean they only, and I mean they small communities compared to the rest of the city. So if we had to follow that approach throughout the city, we certainly don't have that level of funding. What we're doing now is prioritizing catchments, understanding from our modelling which catchments do have higher I&I, and using what we have to try and investigate further and focus and target our efforts on those catchments. So we are combining a lot of what we already have to deliver that. But yes, we can't yet say whether how much more would be needed.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yanni?
Yeah, thank you for the work you've done on this. This is really good to get the big plan. I guess the timing sort of doesn't quite work because it can't really inform the LTP, but it could inform the annual plan. So I just wondered if we can have a session, like we've got the two massive documents tomorrow and stormwater as well, but just having some sense of the budget prioritization process around each of the activities. Like I don't know how others feel, but there's certain things in here that I would love to change, but obviously doing that today probably isn't the best process.
No.
Again, this is a reflection of what is IAU in terms of the annual plan, but this is a reflection of what is currently funded in the LTP and in the annual plan. So it's changing this. The change should be at the annual plan level or at the LTP level, and this should reflect it back. This is not pushing those items.
I think when we adopted the strategy, what we were hoping is it would inform the budgetary processes, not the other way around.
Of course it does, and it did. It informed the asset management plans,
right?
Which in turn informed the infrastructure strategy, which in turn informed the LTP. So it of course did inform all of those planning processes.
Okay.
But the implementation plan is a reflection back in terms of how it was.
I just think at a governance level, the implementation plan is the key thing, and it's great that you've brought it to us. But if we've got concerns around what's being prioritised or what might be changes, this is a really good. The spreadsheet and the actions relate back to the strategy that we adopted. So it's actually a really good way for us to get visibility of what's being done. So I guess the question is, if there's things that we feel should be done that aren't being done, what's the process for us to put those forward?
Yeah.
Is it just through the annual plan, is it?
Well, if it's doable in the annual plan, yes, but otherwise to factor it into our next planning process. So yes, we should have that session then in terms of what other priorities or what other items.
Yeah, I guess just to signal, the area I was really interested in was the technology around manhole covers and infiltration of the utility. Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And
people holes.
People holes. Yeah, whatever you want to call them. But just the way that sewage can come up through the wastewater and come into our, when it floods into our streets and impact on communities. So there was some discussion in here around smart technology, sensors.
So Yanni, is that the only area that you're wanting to talk about?
Well, there's a few others, but that was the one. Stopping the raw sewage coming into, when we have storm events from our wastewater, into people's homes and into the streets is something I think,
but we just
and into
talked
the river.
about that is a work in progress, and it's such a big job that I think staff have prioritised the priority areas, if you like, there.
Yes, and a lot of that is factored into our optimisation planning process as well, in terms of making sure that we do not overflow manholes and or into the environment.
So could I suggest that, because this is actually an internal document, and it's an operational document, that if you've just got a couple of things that you're questioning why that could not be a higher priority, that you could put that through the annual plan questions and get a staff response.
Yeah, I'm happy
so I
to.
think everybody else seems to be fairly comfortable at the moment. So we'll continue with the questions. Are you happy with that, Yanni, to put that through and get a response? And is that all right, Helen?
That's fine. Yeah.
Yes, that's
I just think I think staff should be really commended at bringing this forward in a process. Like we've had those workshops around the water supply, and that was the feedback we gave, that at a governance level, this sort of format is really good because it's easy for us to see the goals that we've agreed and the actions that we're going to deliver on. But we do need a mechanism where we can, give feedback around the priorities and make decisions at a governance
level.
level.
Since you've only got a couple of points there, I think it would be fine for you to put the question through, and then we may lead it into the annual plan and we may not.
Cool.
Andrew.
Thank you. So 2 areas of question. The first is engagement with Ngaitahu and Runanga. And I note the comment that you would normally have engaged with MKT, but due to the COVID situation and so on, that hasn't been possible. That'll be done retrospectively. Engagement with Runanga is often something that happens at the council's Te Honanga Papatipa Runanga Committee. Although realising this is an internal document, is that why you would be engaging with MKT rather than coming to Te Honanga?
Yep.
Yes, so most of the early engagement was on the integrated water strategy itself, and this is implementing that strategy.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, my second question relates to the way that you've listed the various Banks Peninsula areas. So you've got Littleton Harbour, Akaroa Harbour and Kokorarata. And there are issues that are generic across all 3 harbours that seem to have only been listed to one area. So Kokorarata, best practice septic tank design and maintenance, prohibit long drops, prohibit discharge of sewage, bilge water, blah, blah, blah. That's just as relevant, even though it's only listed under Kokorarata, that's just as relevant to Akaroa Harbour as it is to Kokorarata. So if we look at Wairoa, for example, Wainui, sorry, for example, where there are long drops and septic tanks that don't meet the current standard, those issues around septic tank design and maintenance and long drops will be just as relevant, if not more relevant, to Wainui as they are to Kokorarata. Similarly, Littleton Harbour, we talk about sedimentation, and the issue that's raised with wastewater ingress into the stormwater ingress into the wastewater system in Akaroa is just as relevant to parts of Littleton Harbour as it is to Akaroa. So I wonder if we're missing something by compartmentalising to particular areas where some of the issues are a lot more generic than you would think by reading this document.
I understand what you're saying. Certain of the detail that we've provided is project specific, but then there's also, as I said, our activities, which is planning specific. So a lot of where we need to be is entrenched in what we consider to be a planning process. So, for example, what we're saying is that the Banks Peninsula servicing strategy needs to consider servicing throughout Banks Peninsula, whereas we don't have specific funding on the table as yet to address specific additional communities within Banks Peninsula. So it will evolve out of the planning processes that forms part of the implementation plan.
So these shouldn't be read as facts. These should be read as areas of focus which are funded.
Yeah, as the implementation plan areas that we're specifically doing now, areas that's not listed obviously needs to be addressed as part of the overall planning process to get them addressed at the next cycle of LTP.
Because it doesn't read that way. Like the report doesn't read that way at all.
All right.
The report reads as, objectives that are relevant or policies that are relevant. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the policies that you're listing or objectives that are relevant to particular areas are actually relevant across all of the areas that you're listing, or many of the areas that you're listing. And I would hate to think that we're including for some areas and by implication excluding for others considerations that actually are relevant. So it might be more about the way that it reads than its content.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it.
Noted, yes. No,
Yeah.
we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, we can look at how we frame those more specific projects.
I would hate for anybody to think that ingress from long drops was unique to Kokorarata when it's actually a big issue for Akaroa Harbour as well, even though it might not be an issue for the Akaroa Township.
Certainly.
I think that's a really good point, Andrew. Well done. So, it's a living document. All right, if that's all the questions, do you have a question or are you moving it?
I'm having a wee question, if that's all right.
Oh, especially if it's a wee one, yes.
Probably a question for Helen. Where is the plans of the Akaroa wastewater treatment system at? How far along are they, or where are we at roughly?
So at the moment we're applying for resource consents.
Yeah.
Are you asking the plans for the treatment plant? Detailed design of the treatment plant will follow the consenting. So we're consenting the irrigation areas at the moment.
Yes.
The land has been purchased, but I'm aware that a number of questions have been asked about Akaroa from councillors, and so we're planning a briefing in the new year on Akaroa wastewater and where we're up to on the work.
That'll be great, Helen. Thank you.
Because at one stage, and I'm just reading this, are we incorporating devotionals and Akaroa together now, or am I misreading something?
That has been talked about as an opportunity, but there is not a combined project, no.
Okay. So
But we'll give you a full briefing in the new year on these.
Okay, thank you.
Right, do I have a mover? I've filled it and Sarah seconded. If there's any discussion, debate, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed, that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for answering the questions so clearly as well.
Thank you.
So Helen's staying there for the Three Waters bi-monthly report, item 16. So we've got Umana San Pedro, who is going to give us a presentation on the smart meter PowerPoint. Smart meters. She's going to give us a PowerPoint presentation.
So yes, Umana's going to give you an update on the smart water network. So smart meters are a small part of this, but this is about the smarts across the network as a whole.
Great.
Excellent. Umana's coming up.
And then Helen will give us an update on the wastewater treatment plant fire, and then we'll go into your report.
Into the report as a whole.
As a whole. Right. There's 3 stages to this. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Smart water network. I think that this is an exciting project and hope you enjoy the presentation. The first slide that we have here is to give a little bit of context, and it's very good, this presentation just coming after Michelle one, because she refreshed all the objectives of our integrated strategy, and this project is set. It was one of the identified projects to meet those 3 objectives that we have in there. Specifically for the smart water project, our objectives are improve water safety. We want to ensure and demonstrate that our water is safe. Improve asset management. We want to increase asset life and have a better information for asset management and planning. Improve operational management. That information will allow, the information that we are gathering is going to allow us to manage our network better. Improve sustainability by reducing demand, reduce leakage, understand better what is the consumption of our customers, and respond to climate change. And value is there's a very important one. Make the people value our water. This slide is a busy slide, and I'm saying from here this is a little bit hard to read, but basically it's explaining the work packages that we have put together to actually being able to meet those objectives. And I'm going to go in a little bit of detail. Package A is our monitoring system, and the product that we use is Aqua Advanced Water Network, Suez product that has been used in different water entities in Europe. Is really a dashboard where all the data that we are gathering from different sensors, different communication platforms, different softwares is centralized in this dashboard, and it allows us to analyze trends, to plan a response for the events that those sensors are indicating that are happening in the network. We have package B, water quality monitoring, and we are installing a scan nano station. Actually, we installed that last week at Keys Pump Station. We are monitoring continuously pH, turbidity, conductivity, temperature, oxidation reduction potential, and the sulfur organic carbon. And our purpose with this is to be able to reduce the time to detect contamination on our network. Package C, which is transients and acoustic loggers. The transients they measure a spike in pressure. It's a high pressure, a high frequency monitoring of pressure. By monitoring those spikes, we are going to be able to operate the network differently. We are going to be able to reduce the transients, increase the asset of our pipes, because pipes don't like those spikes at all. And also, it serves us as a critical control point, because by maintaining that positive pressure is how we are ensuring or minimizing the risk of contamination. We are installing 200 acoustic sensors. Those sensors will be continuously listening for water escaping from the pipes, and so that means that accurately we can detect where leakage is. We can reduce water demand, of course, and again we can ensure that positive pressure and minimize the risk of contamination. Package D is smart water meters, which, as Helen said, many people, when we talk about smart water, they think about the smart water meters, but it's only one component that helps us to meet our objectives. So we are installing in this pilot roughly 1,500 smart water meters, and we will get hourly consumption information, water use. That allow us to calculate water balance, and those meters, they have also a reverse leak alarm, reverse flow alarm, and leak alarm. So if a property has a leak, it's continuously leaking, we are receiving an alarm, and we can notify the residents. And finally, package E, 8 bulk flow meters and pressure. So continuously we are measuring pressure and flow, so that we can do the water balance calculation, and also we can form DMAs, district meter areas, which brings me to the next slide that explain the concept of water balance and district meter areas. We took that picture from our public website. I think that is a good overview of main components of our water supply, with our aquifers, well, pumping stations, reservoir pumping stations, and I don't know if you can see it there. No, when you see the black arrow in there, so it means that with those bulk flow meters, we will be able to accurately measure what is the flow getting into the system, and then with our residential water meters, we will see the consumption. So if you follow the simple water balance equation, the leakage that we have in our public network is the difference between the flow measured by those bulk flow meters. So that concept, the cluster of houses within an area where we accurately can measure water in and out, is what we define as a district meter area. And I'm insisting in the concept because we mentioned that quite a bit when we talk about smart water. This is our scope, Graffiti. Graffiti water supply zone. The left image is just so the area of the zone, and the right one, the stars, are representing those backflow meters. And because we have installed those backflow meters, we have been able to divide the area in 3 DMAs. And the smart water meters are going only into that north DMA, which is where the arrow shows. May wonder why graffiti. I mean, different reasons in there. Graffiti was the area where we started our pressure management. And by reducing pressure with the valves create transients, so that is an issue. So because we are monitoring transients, we are able to monitor that area better. Graffiti is a very sandy area as well, so we are unable to identify when a leak. It's all drained by the sun. We had a water quality issue at Keys Pump Station, and installing this water quality monitoring instrument was one of the action plan. So yeah, different reasons in there. And the main one is because we needed to choose a zone where we were able to test all this technology and prove that the installation on all these sensors are giving us the value that we expect, and actually we can meet our objectives. These are some examples of some sensors that we have installed so far. We have a transient sensor on the right top. Is a transient sensor installed in a hydrant. Then we have one example of the smart meters installed in 75 Travis Country Drive. And the left picture is showing the control panel for the flow meter, a pressure transducer for those bulk flow meters. So yeah, those are some examples. As I mentioned, we have already installed as well the scan at Keys Pump Station. We are already monitoring all those water quality parameters. And this is how our platform looks like. It's basically what I mentioned at the beginning. The right-hand side, you can see the 3D DMAs there, your spatial capability, and then all sort of graphs where we can identify those events and analyze trends, and all the data coming. It's quite complex. I mean, all the data coming from different packages, different communications. We really needed something where we could do the analysis in a unique platform. And this is our implementation plan. The EOI and RFP started in September 2019. In March 2021, we started the pilot in graffiti. This project at the moment is funded by the VIA Stimulus Fund. So that's why we have the March target there to spend the funds. After that, we have an observation period plan, analyze, especially the data that we are collecting are providing what we want. I mean, are helping us to meet those objectives. And then we have already budget allocated in the next few years for a citywide rollout. I take any questions.
So just we're doing the pressure trials in graffiti as well.
Yeah.
So is that one reason why we're doing this trial as well, or?
Well, one of the reasons why this water supply zone was selected is actually to being able to monitor the
effect.
Yes, exactly. And we have already started to talk about how the citywide rollout is going to look like and what is going to be our next zone. And one of the criteria that we may follow is follow the rezoning project. That may be, yeah.
Great. Well, it's quite exciting, actually, I think. Sam?
Yeah, that was a really good presentation. Thank you very much. One of them talked about, is it the acoustic sound?
Yeah.
So can you just explain what that, how do you pick up, how does that work?
Well, it's just it's as simple as the device actually only record a sound at 2 a.m. every day. So it's not continuing recording sound. It just pick a sound at 2 a.m. and then there is a software on artificial intelligence that analyze the sound and detect that that sound is coming for a leak. Basically, I mean, the reality is that sometimes the sensor pick false leaks. So when a sensor identify a leak, then we have a company that goes there and look for the leak, and sometimes, but yeah, basically it's just record a sound file, and the sound file is analyzed.
And just so that's really useful. So is that happening anywhere else in New Zealand? Like, is it common practice that?
We ran a pilot 3 years ago. I think
Vicente.
Watercare, yes. And I think Watercare have also looked at using acoustic monitors.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's just, and probably the only other one is, how do we communicate more of this to the public? Because I think it would further add confidence. Obviously, it's a pilot, but it would further add confidence, I guess, to the work you're doing in infrastructure. Because I mean, I don't know about everyone else, but I found that really interesting. And in snapshots, talking about how we identify issues within the infrastructure with technology is a really, really good thing. So it doesn't need an answer now, but it'd be cool to have a think about how we communicate that further.
Yeah, yeah, and we're keen to do that. I mean, the pilot, some aspects of the pilot are only just in place.
Yep.
So we've only had the water quality monitoring, for example, in place for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it'll take some time for us to
Wireless.
get some results through.
Yeah, completely. It would just, when we can communicate, that would be really useful.
Yeah,
Certainly.
definitely.
There was, I'll just, am I allowed to?
You are.
There was publicity at the time, when this was initiated, and it was made public about Rafiti, and I've got a friend who lives out there, so I won't explain what happened next, but there are a lot of people who just had questions about, well, why us?
Oh, right.
Yeah. And so and then there were other people who had questions like, why not us?
Yeah.
So, but Sarah was just saying it would be a good idea to do a little video with an explanation of what we're trying to do. And I was just trying to find the actual phrase from the chlorination presentation that I do from time to time, which I stole off you, Helen. But it's change precedes.
Change precedes contamination.
Yeah.
So
that's
being
why
able to monitor
you do
water
the
quality.
acoustic monitoring.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just fascinating technology that I think we should share
Isn't
with as many people as possible. So,
Cutting edge.
yeah.
But it's the idea that if you're going to get a contaminant, there's always something that happens first.
Yeah.
And so if you put all the measures in place that pick up the things that can happen, then that's what increases your ability to...
Yes, the positive
the
pressure
preventer.
stuff. Yeah.
These are all barriers, aren't they?
Anyway, sorry, but it would be great if you can just look at that.
No,
in
don't be
time.
sorry, that was really,
Certainly.
really good questions. Yanni.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the update. I guess just the concern that we're only doing it in a low pressure zone, and so I just wondered if we had another small zone that had high pressure that we could do it in, so we could see the difference.
So Rafiti is not a low pressure zone. There are lower pressure zones across the city. So it's probably one of our medium pressure zones, to
Is
be
it
honest.
one that we changed?
It's one that we have dropped the pressures, yes.
Right,
So I think they've dropped from about 70 to about 55 metres.
Oh, okay.
But the north zone, I think, sits at about 40 metres.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so it's one of the middling.
What about
pressure
a
zones.
high pressure zone? Like, I'm just interested in whether that would be any advantage to looking at a higher pressure zone.
So I think that's the thing Umana touched on. What we will do is roll this out as we roll out our rezoning and pressure management project.
That's great.
Yeah, but sorry, just in terms of the trial, like if the benefits are a certain level in a certain pressure zone, they may not be as good in a higher pressure zone, or they might be better. How would you know?
They will be good across all zones. So getting better operational management, getting better information on the location and the size of leaks, and getting better information on the water balance will be good in all of our zones. So we will eventually roll it across the whole of the city.
Which comes back to my previous question: is if we're going to do it across the city, why don't we just do it now? Why do we need to do the trial, given that we're replacing a lot of meters now and spending that cost?
Because we need to try the technology, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about, I mean, we haven't got into much detail, but the residential meters, for example, that we are using, they toll to the street lights, right? And we need to convert the street lights to 24/7 power. And then we need to check that the meter communicates. So until we are not confident with the selected technology is the right one and is giving the outputs expected, we cannot really roll out anywhere else.
No, I think it's sensible to do a trial first, and I fully support you in that.
We did do a bit of research on how this has been done overseas, and all of the evaluations say start with a trial and then step it out across your city rather than sort of go everywhere all at once.
I think so.
Yeah.
And then you can find the most effective and efficient way to roll out the technology and iron out any issues at a small scale.
So that was a really, really good presentation. Thank you so much. Helen,
Thank
could I
you.
invite you to start the wastewater treatment plant
Certainly.
recovery? Thanks, Imana.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. So the wastewater treatment plant fire, of course, was after we completed our report on Three Waters, so it isn't covered in our usual update. So what I wanted to do here was just to give you a quick overview of changes to operations out at our wastewater treatment plant to recover the effectiveness of the wastewater treatment. And here our aim is to make sure that we comply with the relevant resource consents. So that is primarily the discharge consent for the quality of the effluent that goes out the ocean outfall, and also the consent for odours generated from the treatment plant, because those are where we have the two biggest challenges. So today I'm not going to touch on the fire investigation work that is continuing, nor am I going to touch on insurance matters, which are of course going on in the background, and nor will I cover the damage assessment work. Okay, so what I really want to focus on here is the recovery work and the interim operation.
Thanks, Helen. That's clear.
Okay. So anyone who was in town, of course, on the 1st of November would probably have noticed the fire, either the enormous amount of black smoke in the sky or the smell of it that indeed even came into this building as it rose over the city and then sort of settled across the western parts. It was one of the biggest fires in the city for a number of years and did cause a lot of damage out at the plant. So it started on the roof of one of our trickling filters, and then as that roof collapsed, it jumped across to the roof of the second trickling filter and continued to burn on that one. In terms of the treatment plant itself, this is one of the graphics. It's a simplified graphic of what happens out at the treatment plant, and it's up on our website. And the normal process in terms of the wastewater arriving at the plant, so it comes in on the left-hand side from the reticulation and the pump stations. First of all is the screening, so simply takes out rags and rubbish. And then it goes through to grit removal, so we're taking out sand and silt, which we don't want to go through our processes. And then we have those primary sedimentation tanks that you can see right in the centre of that graphic. Now those remove about 70% of the suspended solids, so they take out a lot of the suspended solids, and about 30% of what is measured by biological oxygen demand. So that's the organic matter that's basically carbon that's in the incoming sewage. The sludge from that process, so the sludge from the bottom of those sedimentation tanks, goes across to the digesters, and the digesters are what generate the biogas and power at the plant. So those parts of the process are not affected. It's the next part, which is the trickling filters. And the trickling filters are the heart of the plant, if you like, in terms of treating the organic matter. So while we take out 30% of that biological oxygen demand in the sedimentation tanks, we take out about 60% of it in the trickling filters under usual operation. Okay, so that's the bulk of the biological treatment happens in those trickling filters. Massive structures, and really obvious in any aerial photos of the city with their bright white roofs. So 8 metres high, 55 metres across, 2 structures. Following the trickling filters, we go on to the solids contact tanks. So they're labelled up there as aeration tanks. And there's a little bit of removal of biological oxygen demand there. So we take out about 7% there. So a relatively small amount. And what we're doing there is we're flocculating the solids. So making the solid material clump together so that when it goes into the clarifiers, the solids drop to the bottom and the clear liquid comes off the top. Now, in the normal course of events, from the clarifiers, the solids make their way back across to the digesters and join the primary sludge, and the clear liquid comes off the top and goes on to the oxidation ponds. So that's the normal process. So what's changed? We've done a brief overview post-fire. So without the trickling filters, essentially what happens is we've got that enormous biological oxygen demand load that is now going through the clarifiers and into the ponds. So we're putting 5 to 10 times as much of a load onto those oxidation ponds, and that's what's caused a lot of problems in terms of odours. Okay, so those ponds are not coping. So there's a number of things that we've done immediately. So right at the beginning of the process, there's some polymer dosing going into those sedimentation tanks, and that's to increase the amount of solids removal and try and remove some of that biological oxygen demand. It does a little bit, so it has a small positive effect, but not a huge effect. But it's worth doing, and that was put in place almost immediately. The second thing, we're already also doing polymer dosing prior to the clarifiers, and again, that's to try and reduce that load on the ponds. The second thing we've done is add oxygen to the ponds themselves. So there's chemical dosing shown at the bottom of the picture just above the ponds, and what we're doing there is adding hydrogen peroxide, which breaks down to oxygen and water, to increase the amount of oxygen going into those ponds, try and prevent them from going anaerobic, because anaerobic ponds smell really bad. Okay, so that's the point of that. We're also wanting to introduce mechanical aerators into those into pond 1, so we'll come back to that. Now, the reason that I'm talking to you today about all of this is that my engineers are all away at a workshop looking at all of the options to further improve what we're doing here. One of the other things you might notice is that while the primary sludge, so from the sedimentation tanks, is going to the digesters, we are bypassing the digesters with the sludge from the clarifiers at the moment. And the reason for that is that the biological material that was suspended into the trickling filters and sitting in those secondary contact tanks has essentially died. So the biological process is not performing as well as it should. And if we send sludge from the clarifiers into the digesters, we're getting very high levels of hydrogen sulfide. So we're bypassing the digesters at the moment. And there's more material going directly to Cape Valley. We hope to resolve that within a few weeks. So just a little bit of a list of the work that's been done, and I'm sorry we didn't get the completion dates in there, but that polymer to assist the removal of solids, that was done within the first week of the fire, so that came on straight away, and then just a couple of weeks after that we added the polymer into the clarifiers. The hydrogen peroxide, that went in I think about week 3, and then the bypass work, we've got a temporary bypass in place at the moment, and we're working on getting a more permanent situation in there. We're also working on better odour control. So where we do the screening and the grit removal, that area of the plant, the odour control was linked to the trickling filter aerator. So that failed after that. But we've got some odour control and some air extraction in place over that part of the process to reduce the odours from there. We were misting across the top of the trickling filters, however we've stopped that just last week. So there is much less odour coming from those trickling filters now. We're putting in some aerators into the oxidation pond, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. There's that ongoing optimisation of the secondary treatment processes that is continuing, and new sludge pipes going in. So we'll just keep working on that, and then the biosolids, yeah. So the biosolids, the primary biosolids, are still going to the main contractors, so they're used for making compost and applying to land. So in terms of the aerators, some of you might remember aerators from years gone by when oxidation ponds were really the primary tool in treating sewage. And so we've managed to source 3 aerators. One of them is in pond 1 already, and the other 2 need a little bit of work to make them perform properly for us. And we're looking at ordering another 6 aerators, subject to the outputs of the workshop today, just to confirm that that's the right approach in the oxidation ponds. But that will assist in 2 things. First of all, it'll increase the oxygen going into those ponds and stop them going anaerobic, and it'll also improve the circulation of wastewater in those ponds, so that we don't get any dead spots in those ponds. So to the trends in wastewater quality, that's a very hard graph to read. Okay, so but essentially what you're seeing is those are the results along the bottom and those dots. And what you're looking at is the last 6 months there for the organic load as measured by biological oxygen demand over 5 days. So it's a 5-day test. It takes a wee while to get the results. And you can see the results running along the bottom there, and then starting to see a slight increase. They're all well within the consented value, which is the dotted line across there at 20 grams per cubic metre. For suspended solids, you'll see there's been quite an increase in suspended solids. So this is measured for the effluent coming out of the ponds, so after they've completed their way through the ponds. But again, it's still within our consented value. So we're keeping a close eye on these trends as we make any changes in the plant. It's worth remembering that wastewater coming into the plant from the primary pump stations to wastewater going out the ocean outfall takes about 20 days. So it's quite a long process, and a lot of that is because of the residence time in the ponds. So we've got about I think it's 200 hectares of ponds out there. So there's a lot of volume there.
Showing us the quality of the water going out the ocean outfall.
Well, it's showing you the quality of the water exiting the ponds. So yes, essentially what's going out the outfall.
Thanks. And
finally, the trends in the bacteria. And here we've seen quite a dramatic increase in the levels of bacteria going out, and then those are starting to come back down, which we're quite pleased about. Now, the consenting on this is a little more complex. So you'll see that we've got a standard consent value of 1,000 fecal coliforms per 100 mils, and then what's called a high value of 5,000 fecal coliforms per 100 mils. And the way the consent works is that we monitor this once a week, and then we look at compliance over an 8-week block. And we don't want any more than 2 values over the high value, and we don't want any more than 6 values over the standard value within any 8-week block. So at the moment we comply, and we're looking to bring the trends back down under that standard value, which is really our target. So next steps, we talked about optimising that secondary treatment process, and those following 3 bullet points are all about that. So we're looking at potentially covering some of the secondary treatment process to control the odours, since that secondary treatment process is now getting a higher load and generating more odours than it would under normal operation. We're also looking at installing some aerators into the clarifiers, so actually turning the clarifiers, instead of just separating out of the solids, getting those clarifiers to act as secondary treatment. And we're also looking at the ponds and possibly changing the flow path through the series of those 6 ponds to get better results out of the ponds. We are continuing to acquire aerators for those ponds, and those are particularly going in pond 1. And ultimately what we want to do is regain that resilience that we had previously in the treatment plant, and be able to cope with any unforeseen events, such as breakdowns or increased loads on the plant. And then, of course, in the longer term, we will establish some workshops to look at the options for replacing that secondary treatment process, whether that's trickling filters or some alternative technology. So there'll be a lot more work in that space. So I'm happy to take any questions.
So Helen, when you're talking about adding more aerators and changing the flow of the liquid in the ponds, and the ponds are also a little bit more contaminated than they were, is there a health risk for people working in there, or do they have to get in?
No, the health risks are no different to the health risks that have always been at the wastewater treatment plant, and so our staff take the necessary precautions, have had the necessary vaccinations for working with wastewater,
right?
And yeah, that will continue.
So it's all doable. Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. David, would you be able to go back, if it's okay, to the, and it's probably a question, I don't know if you can answer it, Helen, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's probably a bit stupid, but stop there.
Suspended solids? Yep.
Yeah, so I guess you're talking about the trend going up. Do you kind of know if that trend will continue, or do you get to a point where it caps out?
We're hoping that won't continue to go up, but to some extent it depends what happens in the ponds.
Right.
So some of it may be due to, well, all of it's due to the higher load on the ponds at the moment, but we're also keeping an eye on those ponds as we go into the summer to make sure we don't get increased algae in the ponds, which would then add to the suspended solids load. Okay. So we're, when you change one thing, 2 or 3 other things also change. Right. So that's what we're keeping an eye on at the moment, and we're taking quite an agile, sort of adaptive approach, and we're monitoring a number of other parameters at the treatment plant as well, which are even more responsive to the changes.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you're kind of, but we're not sure yet in terms of
That's correct. Yeah.
And just the only other one. Sorry, David, if you can go forward. I think it was one. Yeah, that one there. So when you said before about 2 being over the 5,000, 6 being over the 1,000,
That's correct.
Is that correct?
6.
Is that?
That's the each week. The samples each week. Yeah.
So looking at that, we're not far off.
Those are fine. So what we've shown you there are all of the results that we've got, not just the compliance results. So at the moment we're still within the compliance with our consent.
Right. Okay.
And the results have come back down, so we're reasonably confident.
It's come back down at the end.
Yes.
There. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No. Cool. Thank you.
Good questions. Yanni? Oh, sorry, no, it was Aaron first, then Yanni. Sorry, Aaron.
Just so the smell, Helen.
Yes.
How long's that going to be around for? I was at Dyers Road on the weekend, and it was reminiscent of my childhood.
I know, it's funny, that isn't it?
Isn't it? You just go down there and go, hang on. Yeah. Oh,
that's
exactly.
Yes, and that's exactly what it is. It's reminiscent of how the treatment plant was prior to those trickling filters going in. So they went in the 70s, and the roofs went on them in the 80s.
Oh, hang on. Oh, 80s. Thank
Showing
you.
your age. Yeah, but it should be telling us what a brilliant job the council's been doing, keeping us odour free for 40 years.
Oh, it was the improvement that was made was fantastic.
So
it was fantastic, wasn't it?
So until we replace the trickling filters or put some alternative process in place, which will be a number of years, we won't get back to the levels of odour that we've had in the past. So it'll take years before we get everything to the way it has been recently. However, the very poor odours that people have been experiencing, we expect to at least start to reduce those over the coming weeks and to make a significant difference over the coming months.
Well, that's good news. I mean, the unfortunate thing is they're worse on those lovely, still warm days when we like to sit outside, but that's encouraging that it will reduce.
Yes, and they mostly affect people to the west of the plant, of course, because of the predominant easterly wind. Yeah. However, yes, on some very still days, and when you get a gentle offshore breeze rather than an onshore breeze, they are affecting people along the South Shore Spit. So yes, we are sharing it around a little bit as the winds shift, but doing everything that we can within those ponds to improve it.
It's really like you don't know what you got till it's gone scenario. Bring back the trickling filters. Yanni.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the detailed update. I just wanted to know how many complaints we've had and if we've seen any trend about where the complaints are coming from, or
I haven't got that with me, so I'll have to come back to you on that one.
that would be helpful. I think, I mean, the next steps is really good, but I think getting some dates or timeframes or estimated timeframes would be helpful. How realistic is that? I mean, I know there's a lot.
It's probably a
of
bit difficult
uncertainty,
yet, Yanni, because they haven't done the full investigation yet and the diagnosis. You mean timeframes for review?
Well, I appreciate that the long term.
So there's two things. There's two things, Yanni. So we're sort of through the initial response period, and thankfully there's no more hotspots, and the damage investigation can now begin in earnest. However, the recovery plan for the interim operation of the plant, we've got a workshop on that to finalise that today. Okay. And I'll certainly get that to councillors once we've got that fully documented. And we'll have some timelines in there, particularly for getting the aerators, which will make the biggest difference.
In that final step, it would just be good to get a sense of the timeframes for each of those actions.
Yes, and we will definitely do our best to do that. So in terms of the aerators, we've got 3 that we've begged and borrowed for within New Zealand. We've got some possibilities offshore that we're exploring at the moment, and then we'll probably have to put some orders in for some equipment to come, and then we can get some idea of timelines for those. That will certainly, we'll try and get that recovery plan confirmed before Christmas.
Yeah, I think that would be really useful for the community. But I do want to acknowledge all the the really hard work that you're putting in and the long hours that staff are focused on trying to solve the odour issue, like from what you've told us and what we're seeing, even though it's an awful situation, it's not through lack of effort on trying to reduce it.
Thanks, Yanni. It's we can see it's a complex plant. So if you can send a memo out, Helen, with any data around the number of complaints so far, that would be good. And also we'll look forward to a time frame on those last action points.
Certainly.
Right, so if there's no more questions, we can move into your report in full.
Okay, so in the report as a whole, there's a few points of note. First of all, the ongoing work on water reform, and of course, Taumata Arawai has now taken over as the regulator, and we're really pleased that we've had a couple of meetings with the Taumata Arawai staff, both from the Christchurch office, because they will oversee our Banks Peninsula supplies, and also from the Wellington office, because they will have responsibility for the Christchurch metropolitan supply. So they've separated their work there.
And they've both given good feedback on Christchurch.
Good letter.
Yeah, they're very good people to work with. So we're pleased. It's been quite a seamless transition, and they've clearly been doing a lot of work in the background.
Don't have to chlorinate the existing non-chlorinated areas.
Yeah, so we're continuing to operate under our interim water safety plan, and we've got another meeting set up with the Taumata Arawai staff to confirm some of the technical details behind that.
Is that before Christmas? Or?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yep. The economic regulation has come out, and of course that's already been dealt with on your agenda. We've also been really busy on the stormwater management plans, and those are coming to council tomorrow, so there's a lot of work gone in there. And it's just worth noting there that the stormwater management plans are indeed narrow, as they were described by the Zone Committee, and that is because they are about consent compliance. So those stormwater management plans are about consent compliance under the comprehensive stormwater discharge consent, and they are relating to our networks. They're not about surface water generally, but wait, there's more. So the just as you've already seen the water supply implementation plan, and today the wastewater implementation plan, there is also a surface water implementation plan under the integrated water strategy, and that is where the broader work will be described and captured. So that'll be coming to you next year.
That's actually really helpful, Helen, because I was wondering how to respond to that that they pointed out in there.
Yes.
So it might be worth sending them out a memo to explain that.
Yes. Well, we will be engaging with the zone committees. So
Thank you.
Yep, that'll be good. There's a report on drinking water compliance and follow-up actions, and then just noting with respect to the question from Councillor Turner, also that we're doing a thorough needs assessment across Banks Peninsula communities for water supply and wastewater, and that's being done under the Local Government Act. We've done the the desktop survey work, and now we're doing some site visits out there. So that would be me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Right, we've got Jimmy, then Yanni.
Yes, okay, regarding on page 150, the Denton suction tank repair work. You mentioned underway. I just want to know when has been started this work, particularly inside those suction tank.
Yeah, so the roof's finished.
The roof's finished is three months ago already.
Yep, the roof's finished. Yeah, I don't think
inside
they haven't finished the work inside. So at the moment, but we're still using all the water from Denton. We've just got a bypass around the tank.
Yeah.
So all of the pump station's still operating, just with the wells going in directly into the network.
Yeah, but now it's getting warmer.
It is getting warmer.
You mentioned that warmer, they will start the work. So now it's the summertime.
Yep.
Already summertime. Not yet. Still not yet.
We'll report it when it's finished.
Okay. Thank you.
Yanni?
Thank you for the update. I just had two questions. One was on page 147 under resource consents. It talks about a discharge of wastewater from constructed overflow locations during times of high rainfall, and there's discussion in there about ECAN, us going for a possible adjustment. I just kind of was quite keen to know a little bit more about that. Obviously, that would be something that, I would hope that we're doing more to reduce the impact of that.
Yes, we are. So we've actually done quite a thorough paper on this for the executive leadership team, because consent compliance, of course, is a very important thing to us. And I can turn that into a memo for you if you like. But a lot of this is about some of the way we demonstrate compliance with our consent is through the results of our modelling of the network. And the other way that we demonstrate it, of course, is through the reporting of actual overflows. Those two things don't quite equate. So the modelling of the network is a little conservative and predicting more overflows than we're actually seeing for the types of weather events that we're seeing. So we need to do a little bit of work in that space and work with Environment Canterbury to ensure that that we are complying and we are improving, and that we can get that modelling to be more accurate. But I can follow up with a more full memo if you like.
I think it would be useful. Are we progressively improving by reducing overflows?
Overall, yes.
Right.
Yes. Good.
And the second question was in regards to the stormwater management plans, which are and I want to acknowledge there's been huge amounts of work that staff have done and very detailed and technical. But I was just interested why we're not having hearings into approving those, because we don't have a chance to hear directly from the submitters. And it just seemed to me they're quite significant, plans that we're adopting.
Now, I'd have to go back and have a look at why that process was done, but we certainly got legal advice on the process to follow, because the stormwater management plans are required under the consent.
And you have to notify them by the
20th?
I guess I would just be interested in the ones that are upcoming. Like, it's too late to do it for these ones, but whether it's a requirement that we don't have hearings, or whether if we wanted to have hearings, that's an option that we could, to hear directly from people. But I was particularly taken by the zone committee talking about just the lack of joint up, planning around the whole stormwater, wastewater, the whole confusion that community have over trying to be engaged in a variety of processes.
Yes, and it's unfortunate that these first two come before we have that more overarching surface water implementation plan, which would show how everything joins up.
And that's where they're more suitable to be joining in with it in the surface water, not so much the piped stuff.
Well, to be honest, they're a lot more interesting, yes. And there's a lot more scope for community involvement, because that's where we get into the waterways enhancements work, for example.
Daylighting pipe stuff,
and the Y care groups and the school groups that adopt a portion of a waterway.
I know we could have got the awesome bees group to plant the sides, but anyway.
Yeah, but in terms of good governance, like having an ability to have a hearing on something that's significant, I think is, to me is good value.
Could you, as far as a memo about why we?
I'll have to come back to you on that, yes, because I'm sorry I can't remember about why that decision was made. But
thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
Yep. Any other questions for the report? Oh, thanks, Sam. And seconded, Aaron. Thanks, Helen. Is there any debate? I'll just say another excellent report, Helen. Thank you very much, and thank you for those 2 presentations that were extremely helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so I'll move that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Good meeting. I'll now ask Makylie to close the meeting.
Una he te pō, whiri marama, te mokuia, te ao, whatu tangata. Tātai ki ronga, tātai ki raro, tātai ahoro. Haumie, huie, tai kie.
Kia ora. Thank you.